listen, when we talk about making mistakes, I made just about every mistake you can make, and I'm still here. So it's like Chuck Sharp said, as long as you don't make the same mistake twice. And the biggest thing is just showing up for work every day. As a young helper, you put so much stress on the team when you don't come to work. I hear this all the time about young people. Oh, they have no work ethic. Well, you know what? They said that about our generation too.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
There's people out there who are, I think you're born with it. You either come to this industry with a great work ethic, or you don't. And if you don't, you can still learn it. You can still get it. You can still make that happen.
Hello, and welcome to the Elevator Careers Podcast, brought to you by the Allred Group. I'm your host, Matt Allred. When talent is mission critical, call the Allred Group. With industry expertise, top talent, and exceptional customer service, you need the Allred Group on your side. Your priority is our priority. Call now, 404-890-0445. In this episode, I interviewed Kris Garcia about his journey from the automotive industry to the elevator business. We discussed his passion for sales, mentorship in the trade, and important lessons he learned throughout his career. Kris emphasized the importance of relationships and shared that he and many others are happy to help newcomers to the elevator trade. Kris, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I've enjoyed getting to know you over the years, and it was great to see you in California at the NAC show. A lot of fun.
Yeah, it sure was. What a great place.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So you and I got talking a little bit about just your path through the elevator industry, and tell me that story. How did you come to find elevators?
So my first career was in the automotive business. I'm from Detroit, so that was, a lot of people in that area went to work in the automotive business. So I started in the automotive business, and I had an uncle who had an elevator cab interior company, and he asked me if I would come and help him because he was getting to the point where it was more than he could handle on his own. And so I thought, what the heck? How can someone make a living doing elevator cab interiors? I didn't even know that was a thing. When I get in the elevator, I just push the button and it goes up and down. You never think about
Stainless steel box. How can you possibly make a living at that?
Some crazy niche business, and he figured out a way to make money at it. I thought it was basically just a temporary thing, but I did it anyway. He seemed to love it. So
how did he convince you? I mean, automotive, there's some prestige there.
Yeah, it was. And it was a pretty good job I had. And actually I had to take a pay cut to take this job. But he said, we'll get to work together. And of course I looked up to my uncle. So we'll get to work together. You'll have all this autonomy. You'll be able to help me run this company. And then maybe, hey, and who knows, maybe someday this will be yours, and I'm like, great. I really want that. I'll come and help you anyway. And we'll see if we can make something happen there. And we sure did. We grew that company. It was the largest elevator cab interior company in Detroit, which, there's a lot of elevators in Detroit, if you don't know that. And so we did really well. But as I got to know people in the elevator business from working with them, I eventually got recruited out of that company, out of my family business. And I don't know if you've ever worked for family before, Matt, but it's not all what it's cracked up to be.
That's just it. I mean, when he started making those promises to you, oh, you'll get to have this and run this, and it sounds like a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah, and you never work harder than you do for your family. That's for sure, because they always know everything that's going on in your life. They don't give you any breaks. So I ended up going to work for a Cone A elevator. That was my first stop.
So when did you decide that, hey, I actually like this thing that to me seems so improbable? What was it that clicked for you?
Well, I think that the first thing I thought of was these guys all really make a lot of money for doing this.
That shocked you though, right? I mean,
yeah, it certainly did. And, from coming from the automotive industry, I had no idea about the elevator industry. And so, just getting to know all these folks and listen, when I started, they didn't make near the kind of money that they make now. This was back in 1998. I think they had just signed a new contract to go from $17.50 an hour to like $30 an hour. So, and I thought that's
a heck of a leap there.
Crazy amount of money, for an elevator technician. But My passion was always sales, so I gravitated toward that side of the business, and at that time, they put you in the field first. Did you know that? Yeah, there was a time they put you in the field first, so you stay in the field for a couple of months, and then right before, union wants to bring you on board, then they bring you back in the office. So I had an opportunity to stay in the field, but, I chose to go into the office. That was always my passion, is in sales, so that worked out great for me.
Very cool. So yeah, at some point you realize, hey, this is a place for me. And by then, had you decided, hey, I think I'm going to stay here for a while?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I thought, man, this is great. And I looked around the people that I was working with at the time, and some of them a lot of those people are still in the industry and have become, like captains of the industry. My first job, I worked for a guy named Jeremy Metzger, who's, you know,
Wow. Okay. No,
yeah.
Jeremy.
And right. Who doesn't know Jeremy, right? And, I just thought, man, this guy, he just has everything. He has this beautiful home, this beautiful family, and he's just making a great living. I'm like, man, that's what I want. I want to do that. So, yeah, so it was a no brainer for me. Really, the elevator business. Once I got in it, there was no leaving.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's, it got in your blood, in other words, is what I like to say.
Yes. Yeah. Absolutely. And that happens to a lot of people too. In this business. So,
Absolutely. So, in addition to Jeremy, who were some of the big mentors, people that you felt like really made an impact, made you want to stay, right? Because I think more than anything, from what I understand, right, people stay because of the people, right? If they're gonna leave a job or a company, and people will say that, right?
mhm,
That they don't leave a company, they leave a boss.
yeah,
That relationships do have a big impact on your happiness, your success, your longevity, all of that.
sure. Yeah, and I've worked for some really great bosses in my career. Of course, Jeremy Mesker is one, and that guy, he really helped me a lot. To understand the business and to be really good at it, at sales, and not just at sales, but all aspects of being a salesperson and what that took. But I'll tell you, the best boss I ever had. He may watch this podcast, he may not, but if anybody ever gets a chance to meet a guy named Chuck Sharp from DC Elevator. That guy was by far the best manager that I ever had. He was tough and he was fair, but he was a great coach at the same time. He gave me an opportunity to be the president of Right Way Elevator. I did that for a little while, and while I was there, he really mentored me in that role and really helped me be successful. If you ever run into Chuck Sharp, you make sure you tell him that I mentioned him on this podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. He was willing to be tough, but coach you, and you knew that he cared more than you were
Yeah,
worried that he was gonna, treat you
yeah,
arbitrarily.
yeah. And I was a guy that came into a role that I had never done before, and I made a few mistakes. And he would always say, "Listen, you're going to make mistakes. That's part of the job, but just don't make them twice. That's when we have a problem. Don't make that again." So I tried never to do that, never to do it twice, and that was
Right,
good
right.
advice.
That's when it gets super expensive, right?
Exactly.
There's like,
Yes, sir.
yeah, time to cut losses. So you mentioned being in sales, and that
Yeah,
sounds like your true passion, right?
yeah, yeah. It certainly is. Yeah,
What
that's
what's your
something.
what's your favorite thing to? I mean, is it mod? Is it service? Is it new construction? Or
So I think that service was always where I leaned mostly towards, but I loved selling modernization as well. I was never a new construction guy. That takes a special kind of person to sit and read prints and do takeoffs all day. That's a really very hard job to do because you're just focused on that job. You never leave your desk. I was always the guy. I just wanted to be out. I wanted to be out seeing customers, be out in the field, hanging out with the mechanics, and looking at equipment. I loved that part of the job. And I wasn't always great at it, honestly. When it came to mod, that was something I had really had to learn. I had to make myself
well,
learn
there's
it.
a lot to learn, right? I mean,
Yeah,
it's a very
yeah,
complex. It's very dependent upon what are you pulling it out of, and
right.
can this brick building even hold it up, or do we need to do some kind of remediation to even put the new one in?
Yeah, yeah, so that's something, and of course, again, I made a few mistakes, and Some of them were costly, some of them not so costly, but, I just loved that part of the business. I really loved the mechanical aspect of it, and like anybody, I just love to win. So, I like the competitive aspect of it as well. I loved it when I won a job from someone else and it was close, and we were battling it out in the end, and then finally I came out the winner, and I hated it when I didn't come out the winner.
So it makes a good salesperson, right? That killer instinct, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. What would you say has become your favorite part of working in the elevator industry?
I think that it's the people in this industry. It's a lot of people like me who have the same passions, who have that. It's a complex system. It's a complex job. And and any part of it, if you're in operations or you're in sales or you're the boss, or you're the president or you're the vice president, whatever it is, it's a complicated job because first of all, you're dealing with customers um, that cannot always be agreeable, right? And then you're also dealing with uh, the mechanical aspect of the job. It seems like it's just a box that goes up and down. And like I said, when I first got introduced to the industry, I thought you get in, you push a button, it takes you where you need to
That's all
go.
there is to
Never,
it, right?
never thought about it at all. What goes on inside the shaft or inside the elevator machine room? So it's a very complex industry, and so it's the people that get involved in this industry that I love the most about it. When you get a couple elevator guys in a room, the conversation is always about elevators. It's very interesting how it always turns to elevators, and it turns to it's either something about some incident that happened or how it could have been prevented or about some technology or something that's going on, but the conversation always turns to elevators, and I just love the people.
Absolutely, absolutely. So you've mentioned a couple times, made some mistakes, learned from them.
Yeah.
What would you say is one of the most valuable lessons you've learned through this?
Well, man, listen, there's been so many valuable lessons that I've learned. I've been in this business a long time, Matt. So I think that the biggest lesson I ever learned was that this industry, although it's very large, is also very small. And you need to make sure that you don't leave any enemies. Listen, it's hard to get through an entire career and not make an enemy or two. If you're doing your job, then you're bound to piss someone off at some point in your career. But as a whole, you just want to make sure that you just leave every door open when you leave. Make sure you treat everyone with respect. And I can't ever remember losing my temper, or I've always been like really easy to work with, as far as I know. Now, there may be some people out there that might disagree with that, but I always felt like I was very easy to get along with, very easy to work with.
Well, I was going to ask you if you learned any of those the hard way, right? I mean, sometimes, I know that a lot of times I do something wrong and then it's like, yeah, okay. Now I
Yeah,
understand.
listen, there may be a time or two that I did learn that lesson, man, but we're not going to talk about that on today's show.
I thought I'd ask the question. Sometimes people aren't afraid to share those, but no, it's all good to let that water go under the bridge too.
Yeah, yeah. I think that if there's if I had any regrets at all, there was a time or two when maybe I should have kept my mouth shut and just did what I was told. And I think that that's a valuable lesson for anyone. You let your emotions get the best of you, but I think that overall, I built some great relationships in this industry. People I worked with 25 years ago. As a matter of fact, I just called somebody the other day and we had a long conversation about a job. I worked for ThyssenKrupp back in Detroit for many, many years. I was a sales manager there, and I called up one of the guys that worked there. He works now for a fire company. He works for Johnson Controls, and his elevator experience was able to help him get that job. So that's another thing about this industry. It's has a lot of things that you can use in other industries as well. But I just called him up out of the blue, and he took my call right away. And immediately, it was like we were still in the same cubicle, talking about sales back in the elevator business. So, I built some really strong relationships in this industry, a lot more than I made mistakes. That's for sure.
Yeah. Well, and just I was having a conversation talking about the value of relationships and that they do
Mm,
make a big impact both in the near, short term and long term. And
huge.
it's very important.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, and there's a lot of young people now too that are trying to get into this industry and ask for my help, whether it's trying to get in to be a mechanic or trying to get into the sales side of the business or whatever it is. And I always tell them the same thing. I'm like, just, you have to make yourself easy to work with. And, just like I told you, this industry can be very small. So as you progress through the industry, don't just try your best not to make any enemies because it'll come back to haunt you at some point.
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, like I say, you may make a few, but don't make a habit of it, right? Because it'll cost you.
That's probably true in every aspect of life. Don't make a habit out of making enemies, Matt.
Right, right. Good point. Yeah. I mean, and some of it may happen. Just it might be a competitor, right? Well, I don't like that guy because he keeps
Yeah.
beating me to the sale, right?
Hmm.
um,
Yeah.
that's going to happen. But yeah, who knows? Maybe it's just good-hearted competition. Usually won't make enemies.
Yeah. As long
So
as you don't take it to the too don't take it too far.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So if you could look back, what'd you say? 25 years in the industry? Is that a little bit
Yeah,
more,
like
maybe?
27, I think.
All right, on.
27 is the magic number.
If you could look back at young Kris back then, starting out, what advice would you give yourself?
The advice I would give myself is that, anytime you think the grass is greener, see whether it be some promotion or whether it be, working for another company. I think one of my biggest regrets is that I left ThyssenKrupp Elevator. And when I look back on that, I had a great career path and I hit a few bumps in the road and I got upset and I quit. And I think that that's something that if I had it to do over again, I would have never left. I would have stuck it out and made my way into some other area of the company or moved on to a different position there. But to make a long story short, I got promoted to be the director of sales for the East region. And somehow they combined five regions to three. This was back in 2013 or 14, somewhere around there. And so I got caught up in that. And so they offered me a couple different jobs. They said, hey, you could have your choice of these different jobs. So one of them was branch manager of Sarasota. And so I took that job and I didn't like it. I didn't like it at all. So I wanted to get out of it. The minute I took it, I wanted to get out of it. But I ended up staying there for a year and, I did my best. I didn't do great, but I didn't do terrible either. I didn't ruin the company, but I didn't love it. So, but they kept promising they were going to move me on, kept promising. And then after I was there a year, I'm like, listen, I'm done waiting. And I left. And I think that was the biggest mistake that I ever made. Because after that, I just bounced around at different companies. I could just never really find a home. And I think that if I had stayed there, I probably would be running some other branch right now or doing something, similar to like those guys that have been in that tenured at ThyssenKrupp now.
Sure, sure. And it might have been the timing, right? Maybe if you'd have hung out for 5 more years,
Yeah.
maybe you'd have found the right next step or whatever. I mean, it's hard to say, but obviously you had enough experience that you were able to find something, right? To find
Yeah,
some work
certainly.
and yeah.
And and listen, the nice part about it is that moving on and, I got a pay increase every time I left. So, the different jobs I did bouncing around, I ended up making an extremely good living. So that was never a problem. It was just a problem of, I just never found a home. That's really
Right,
what it came
right.
down to. Yeah. So
Weren't maybe as settled as you wanted to be, but
correct. Yeah.
still had a lot of value to bring and hence a lot of opportunities. And I do see that a lot with people I know that, once you're kind of established in the industry that as long as you're not making too many enemies, right? There's
Right.
a lot of people
Yeah.
that can benefit from your knowledge, your experience, everything you bring. It's difficult enough to get in and get ramped up so that to the point that a lot of people who get there are highly valued because of those
Yeah.
skills and everything you've learned.
That's correct. Absolutely.
I've got one more question I wanted to bounce off
Sure.
you. Is there anything you want to say before I kind of give you my last one?
No, I think that, other than I did maybe just want to elaborate a little bit on, giving advice to young people. And I did want to say that I've never said no to anyone that's asked me, how can you help me get into this industry? I've gone out of my way to help many young people get started in this industry. And I like I said, I always tell them the same thing. What I told you already is that, try and show up for work every day, do what your boss tells you, be easy to work with, and then and just try and learn the business as best you can, because and a lot of that's on you. You have to do that yourself, just like I did, just like everyone else did. We talked about those great guys in the industry. They learned how to do that by putting their hands on things and doing it themselves. And
Got to show up curious, right? You got to ask a lot of questions, and you
sure.
got to want to know. And what I
Yeah.
do see a lot is that if you have that desire to know, people will bend over backwards to make sure you get that information. It's
That's correct.
amazing. I was talking to a gentleman earlier today that really said that I want to share my knowledge because I know I'm not going
Yeah.
to be around forever, and so I want to I want to teach everything I know.
Yeah, right, exactly, and that's exactly how I feel too. I love to help young people who are enthusiastic about getting into this business. Listen, not everyone makes it because it's not an easy business. It's very, safe. You have to be safety conscious, so there's a lot of things that deter people from being in this business, but it's a great, great business.
Yeah. Well, obviously, it's worked as your second career for these many years, and actually, I was going to ask you about advice for the next generation. You kind of beat me to it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Good. Well, listen, I could talk about that all day, because I listen, when we talk about making mistakes, I made just about every mistake you can make. And I'm still here. Like Chuck Sharp said, as long as you don't make the same mistake twice. And the biggest thing is just showing up for work every day. As a young helper, you put so much stress on the team when you don't come to work. And I hear this all the time about young people. Oh, they have no work ethic. Well, you know what? They said that about our generation too. You know, there's people out there who are, I think you're born with it. You either come to this industry with with a great work ethic or you don't. And if you don't, you can still learn it. You can still get it. You can still make that happen.
Sure. I mean, it's a choice, right? You got to choose,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think for those who choose to show up and choose to ask questions and want to learn and choose to not make recurring mistakes over and over and over, right? There's all kinds of opportunities. There's all kinds of benefits to really I guess engaging in the process, right? Just being
Yeah.
being a part of it, showing up, like you're saying.
Yeah. And so, also this business can be extremely rewarding. If you learn it and become really good at it, you can do anything that you want to do in this business.
Well,
Really.
that is one point that I'm glad you brought that up. Just having worked in other industries prior to getting to elevators and being a part of HR, it's almost like certain industries, certain companies would block people if you don't have a bachelor's degree, you're never going to promote, kind of thing. And I saw that a lot. But this is much more based on what you know, right? And if you get in and you know and have the expertise, then yeah, you're not really limited in the same way from what
Yeah.
I've observed.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
Yep. Very cool. Well, Kris, I appreciate you being here today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you, man. I really appreciate it. I really do. Thank you very much for having me.
You bet. Yeah. Well, good luck to you. Stay safe out there and we'll chat again.
Sounds good. See you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Elevator Careers Podcast, sponsored by the Allred Group, a leader in elevator industry recruiting. Please visit our YouTube channel at Elevator Careers or check us out online at elevatorcareers.net. Please like and subscribe, and until next time, stay safe.